All right, I'm going to try and not make this video be long today, but I feel like it's going to be. We'll see how it goes. What I'm going to try and explain to you is called solving a quadratic. And a quadratic is a parabola. So a quadratic equation has an x squared in it. So that would be this example right here. That has an x squared in it. If you graph it, it's a parabola. That's a quadratic formula, a quadratic equation. And when you see the instructions solve this equation, they mean solve for x. And that's kind of not always easy. So I'm going to use a straight line, a y equals mx plus b, to try and explain how to do this. So let's back up to something that we're a little bit more familiar with. This over here, y equals mx plus b. Here's an equation that I gave you. If you plug this into Desmos, your graphing calculator, you're going to get a graph that looks like that. The straight line that crosses down here at negative 32, and it's going to cross the x-axis right around there, and I'm going to show you how to figure out exactly what that point is. Hopefully you already know because we've done this, but regardless. What this equation says is basically if you plug any number in for x, any value in for x, it'll tell you what the y value is that goes with it. They're just points on the line. So that's what this chart is down here. Let's say we plug in a negative 1 for x. We're going to get a negative 34 for y. How do I know that? Because of this right here. I plugged in a negative 1 in for x into this equation. So instead of 2 times x minus 32, it's 2 times negative 1 minus 32. And 2 times negative 1 is negative 2. Negative 2 minus 32 is negative 34. So negative 1, negative 34 is a point on this line. You would come over one space and go down to negative 34. It'd be right about there. Then I plugged in a 0 for x. And 2 times 0 is 0. 0 minus 32 is negative 32. So when x is 0, y is negative 32. That's your y-intercept. That's the number that's by itself, is the y-intercept. That's why it's always the number by itself is always the y-intercept, because when you plug in a 0 for x, those terms go away, because anything times 0 is just 0, and you're only left with the number that's by itself. Okay, back to this. Plug in a 1. You get 2 times 1 is 2. 2 minus 32 is negative 30. So at 1, negative 30, that's right about here. That's on the line. Now we could keep doing this forever. There's an infinite amount of points on this line. But there's one point that I'm really interested in, and that's the x-intercept. I want to know, where is that x-intercept? Am I just going to have to keep guessing? Am I going to keep plugging in numbers for x until my answer over here equals 0 for y? You could. I mean, you might be able to see that there's a pattern here and you're decreasing by 2 every time. So how far down do you have to go on the x column to get to 0? You could probably figure out that pattern, but there's an easier way to do it. And that's instead of substituting in numbers for x into this equation, we're going to substitute in a 0 for y into this equation. Because that's what an x-intercept's y coordinate is 0. No matter where this point is, if that's at 14, if it's over 14 spaces, then it's 14, 0. If it's over, let's see, these are 10, so 10, 20, somewhere in between 10 and 20. If it's over 17 spaces, then it's 17, and you're not going up or down. It's 17, 0. No matter what that point ends up being, it's some number comma 0. That's what an x-intercept is. The y-coordinate is always 0. To get to that point, you're just going left or right. You're not moving up or down at all. And the y-coordinate tells you how far to move up or down. So if we want to know what this number is, you plug in a 0 for y. Because that's what x and y are in these equations. In the slope-intercept form, in the quadratic form, the x and the y are just ordered pairs. They represent ordered pairs. They represent points on the line. They represent the x and the y coordinate of any given point on this line. So if you want to know a specific one, you could plug in one half of it and solve for the other half. So we've been plugging in the x half and solving for the y. Let's plug in the y half and solve for the x. particularly the y half when the y half is 0. So you plug in a 0 for y, and you get 0 is equal to 2x minus 32. And how do you solve for x now? You add 32 to the other side, so you get 32 is equal to 2x. And now you just divide by 2. 32 divided by 2 is 16. So when y is 0, x is 16, and that is our x-intercept. That's solving the equation. When they say solve the equation, they mean make y equal to 0 and solve for x. So we just did that there. Now let's do it over here. We can make the same kind of chart, but really all I want to know is what is x when y is 0? So instead of doing all this, I'm just going to skip to this line right here. I'm going to go right to, let's make y 0 and solve for x. So if y is 0, you've got 2x squared minus 32. Now how do you solve for x? The exact same way we just did. There's just one more step at the end. So let's get to the end. You add 32 to the other side. You divide by 2 to get x by itself. So 16 is equal to x squared. So now that's why there's one more step here. Last time we had 16 was equal to x and we were done because that's what we want. It's just a regular x. Now we have an x squared. We got to unsquare our x. We got to get rid of that squared. And to unsquare something, you take the square root. So we have to take the square root of that x squared to unsquare it. But whatever you do to one side, you have to do to the other side. So we got to take the square root of both sides, the square root of x squared and the square root of 16. And when you take the square root of x squared, you get x. When you take the square root of 16, you get 4, but you also get negative 4. So that's what this plus minus means. That means a positive 4 or a negative 4. It's basically a shortcut of saying the answer to the square root of 16 is 4 or negative 4 is equal to x. Instead of writing it out like that, 4 or negative 4, it just gets written like this, plus or minus 4 is equal to x. Why is it plus or minus? Why does the negative work as well? Well, imagine plugging in a negative 4 in for x right here. What is negative 4? If you had 16 is equal to negative 4 squared, would that be true? Yeah, because a negative times a negative is a positive. So negative 4 squared is actually negative 4 times negative 4, which is positive 16. So it works. The negative and the positive both work. If you plug in a negative 4 for x, you get 16. If you plug in a positive 4 for x, you get 16. So there's two answers for what is our x-intercept here. Here there's only one. When you just have an x, there's only one answer. When you have an x squared, there's two answers. And it's positive 4, which is right here, and negative 4, which is right there. All right, so we've done this before. Hopefully that was review and you guys get this. This is just one more step at the end. It's the exact same process. You're plugging in a 0 for y to find your x-intercept. But at the end, you have to take the square root to get rid of the x squared. Now, where this all gets crazy is when you have an x squared and an x in the same problem. So if you have, say, y equals x squared plus 7x plus 12. Now you have an x squared and an x in the same problem. Now that method I showed you is not going to work, all right, for simply solving for x. We're still going to plug in, we can still find the x-intercepts here, and that's what I'm going to show you. How to find the x-intercept. Where does this graph, if you plug this into Desmos, you're going to see a graph that's going to look like this, something like this. It's going to look something like that. How do I know that? Because I know just by looking at it what the x-intercepts are, and I'm going to show you how you can do that really quickly too. But why is it over there? How do we know that the x-intercepts are actually negative 3 and negative 4? Well, you substitute in a 0 for y, so we start off the same. But this is where it changes. If you try and get x by itself here the same way we did last time, the first thing you're going to do is subtract 12 to the other side. You're going to get negative 12 is equal to x squared plus 7x. Now what? You're trying to get it down to just 1x. We want to know some number is equal to x at the end. So how are we supposed to get rid of the x squared and the x? You can't combine them together. We've got to get down to 1x. You can't do it by that method. All right, it just doesn't work. If you were to subtract 7x to the other side, say, and get minus 7x minus 12 is equal to x squared, and then take the square root of both sides, you'd end up with something crazy on the left. It would equal x, but you still have an x over here. That's no good. You got to just have 1x. And you can't combine those together now because that's underneath the square root. So you're not getting any closer to the answer here. It just doesn't work. The method is what we've been doing all last week. Factoring. You have to factor this. That's how you get rid of the x squared and just get down to x's. So you factor this. What two numbers multiply to give 12 and add to give 7? 3 and 4. So you plug in a 0 for y. We're going to try and solve for x here. What do we need to put in for x to make this whole thing equal 0? Well, we're going to factor it. We're going to get x plus 3 times x plus 4 is equal to 0. Well, that's not really an answer. You know, where is this crossing the x-axis at? Well, it's when it's whatever number that is, if we put that into this equation, it's going to equal 0. So that number, same with this. So there's two answers. There's two numbers that we could put into this equation and do the math, and it's going to equal 0. One of them is negative 3, the other one's negative 4. Think back to this example. What is 0 times 2? It's 0. What is 2 times 0? It's 0. If you multiply something by 0, your answer is 0. And that's basically, this is two things being multiplied together. If one of them's 0, it doesn't matter if it's the first one or the second one, your answer is 0. And that's what we have here. We have two things being multiplied together. Those two things just happen to be parentheses. They happen to be quantities. If one of those quantities equals 0, then the whole thing's going to equal 0, because 0 times something is 0, just like right here. Or something times 0 is 0, just like here. So as long as one of these two equals 0, our whole equation is going to equal 0. So how do we make this first part equal 0? Well, we solve for x. We just break it out as a separate problem. So we get 0 is equal to x plus 3. Subtract 3 to the other side, and you get x is equal to negative 3. Or this part could equal 0. So you get 0 is equal to x plus 4. Subtract 4 to the other side, and x could equal negative 4. So those are our two x-intercepts. You have two x-intercepts. Negative 3 and negative 4. So that's how I knew that the parabola was going to look something like this in the beginning, because this is a pretty easy one to factor. I knew that 3 and 4 would multiply to give 12 and add to give 7. And if you have a positive 3 and a positive 4, it's a negative 3 and a negative 4 that makes those add to 0. Negative 3 and positive 3 cancel out. So here's the lesson, people. This is your summary for this lesson, is that if you only have an x in your equation, not an x squared like y equals mx plus b, you could solve for the x-intercept real easy by making y equals 0 and just subtracting b to the other side and dividing by m. Good old-fashioned solving for x the old-fashioned way. It's pretty easy. There's only one answer. You're done. As soon as you get an x squared, now you're going to have two answers. You're going to have two x-intercepts. And that's because when you take the square root, let's say x is 25, when you take the square root of a number, you get a positive and a negative answer. So you have two answers. Now, if you have an x squared and an x, say you have this, you're still going to have two answers. Whenever you see the x squared, you're going to have two answers. It's just you can't take the square root of that. You have to factor it. So y equals x, one answer. Y equals x squared, two answers, and you take the square root. Y equals x squared plus x is two answers, and you have to factor to find it. All right, so that's the most complicated one. This one's not too bad. You just take the square root. That one's pretty easy. X squared means two answers. If there's also an x, you have to factor. So that's how you go about finding x-intercepts, which is solving the equation.